While we prepare to hear this matter, I kindly ask you to support the channel by subscribing, giving a like, and mentioning in the comments where you're tuning in from.
When his name was called, he didn't even lift his head. I remember that clearly, not because it was loud, not because it was rude in the usual way. It was familiar to him. Like this room, this process, this moment, had already been decided somewhere else. It was an ordinary morning in municipal court, the kind where the air carries the quiet nervousness of everyday people. An older man clutched a stack of receipts like they were a life raft. A woman whispered what sounded like a prayer into her sleeve. You could hear paper sliding in folders, the soft scrape of chairs, a cough that tried to apologize for itself. And against that backdrop, he sat like he was waiting for a flight. Early 30s, expensive, understated suit, not flashy, just precise. The kind of tailoring that tells you the person is used to doors opening before they touch the handle. He sat upright, calm, almost comfortable. He didn't look around at the other people. He didn't look at me. His expression wasn't defiant. It was settled, as if he belonged to a different set of rules. I've seen people come into my courtroom scared. I've seen them come in angry. I've seen them come in embarrassed. But most people, even the stubborn ones, respect the fact that this is a place where we're all equal, for a moment, at least in principle. When that respect is missing, it's rarely about courage. It's usually about a belief. On the surface, his case was nothing. A small municipal matter, no criminal charge, no violence, nothing that would explain the confidence sitting on him like a second jacket. Yet he carried himself as if time in this room belonged to him, as if the rest of us were simply part of the delay. I glanced up from the bench and watched him while another person spoke. He didn't react to the plea, to the worry, to the trembling voice in front of me. He waited, patient, detached, like he wasn't here to be heard. For a second, I caught myself thinking, he isn't here to listen. He's here to outlast the process. And that's when I knew something else, something colder beneath the calm. He wasn't waiting for a decision. He was waiting for his turn. I kept moving through the docket, case after case, the way you do when a room is full of people who want to go home. A young driver stumbled over his explanation, cheeks red, hands shaking as he held a crumpled ticket. An older woman spoke too fast, afraid silence would cost her something. You could feel the small embarrassments in the air, ordinary, human. And all that time, I watched him, not openly, not like a challenge, just the way a judge watches when something doesn't fit. He didn't share the room with anyone. While others stood at the podium, he stayed in his seat, eyes on his phone, not texting frantically, scrolling calmly, like entertainment. When someone took too long to speak, he let out a quiet breath through his nose, a controlled sigh that wasn't meant to be heard, but didn't mind if it was. When I assessed a fine on a man who could barely afford his shoes, I saw the faintest curve at the corner of his mouth. Not a smile of joy, a smile of assessment, like he was studying how consequences land on other people. I remember thinking, this isn't indifference, this is evaluation, like he's looking at people, not cases. Then he did something small that changed the temperature in the room. Without raising his voice, without leaning forward, he said, "Can we move this along?" It wasn't shouted, it wasn't profanity. It was worse than that because it carried the assumption that the court was a line at an airport and the people speaking were obstacles. A few heads turned, you could feel it. A quiet ripple of offense from folks who had been sitting there for hours, clutching papers, waiting their turn like everyone else. The room got tighter. The air got sharper. I didn't correct him immediately. I didn't give him the satisfaction of a confrontation. I simply looked at him longer than usual, the way my father used to look at a man who spoke out of place, not angry, just steady. People show you who they think they are while they wait, not when they plead, not when they apologize, Waiting strips the mask down to belief. And his belief was clear. Equality in a courtroom was a story for other people. I called his name again, firm but calm. This time, he lifted his head. He met my eyes directly. There was no question in his face, no uncertainty. Only expectation, like he was waiting for a familiar signal, something subtle that would tell him the process was about to bend. He rose smoothly, adjusted his jacket as he walked, and stepped to the podium like he'd done it before. And as he stood there, composed and certain, I realized he hadn't been waiting to speak. He'd been waiting to see if I would play my part. I addressed him calmly. No edge in my voice, no lecture, just the question in front of us, spoken the way questions are supposed to be spoken in a courtroom, clear and ordinary. He answered the way confident people do, smooth, precise, too relaxed for a room where most people measure every word. His posture leaned forward just a touch, like we were closing distance instead of keeping it. His voice dropped slightly, as if the conversation had shifted into a smaller circle. I noticed the details you only catch when you've watched thousands of faces from the bench. His hands rested loosely, but his fingers moved in short, practiced motions. He nodded at his own answers, not for me, for himself. He wasn't explaining. He was guiding. That's when I understood something important. He wasn't here to tell me what happened. He was here to bring me to a conclusion he believed we already shared. At one point, he said something that didn't belong to the record at all. He said it lightly, almost conversationally. I'm sure you understand how things work in a town like this. He didn't name anyone. He didn't ask for anything. He didn't threaten or suggest. But the meaning didn't need translation. It hung in the air, neat and careful, like a note slid across a table without fingerprints. I didn't respond right away. Silence can be uncomfortable for people who expect momentum. I let it stretch, not as punishment, as space. In that quiet, the mask slipped just a little. His fingers paused, then resumed, faster this time. His eyes broke away from mine for a second, scanning the room like he was checking whether the walls had ears. When he looked back, the confidence was still there, but it had a hairline crack running through it. I thought to myself, he isn't waiting for a ruling, he's waiting for a signal. People who believe rules are flexible don't push first. They listen for permission. I kept my face neutral. No reaction, no reassurance, no disapproval, just presence. Then I said evenly, "Sir, answer the question I asked." The words weren't loud, they didn't carry judgment, but they drew a line. For the first time since he'd walked into my courtroom, he hesitated. Not long, just enough to reveal the effort it took to recalibrate. His shoulders tightened, his jaw set, the forward lean stopped. In that brief pause, I knew something else with certainty. The next thing he chose to say wouldn't decide the case. It would decide who he was willing to be in this room. After I told him to answer the question I'd asked, he did something people only do when they believe the rules are flexible for them. He leaned in, not aggressively, not carelessly, just enough to shrink the distance, to turn a courtroom exchange into something quieter, more personal. His voice dropped, smooth and practiced, as if lowering it made the words less visible. "Judge," he said, "I don't think this needs to be official." He didn't ask for money. He didn't slide anything across the podium. But the message was clear. Let's keep this off the record. Let's handle this between reasonable people. I watched the way he glanced briefly to the side, not toward the gallery, not toward the officer, just enough to check who might be listening. His confidence didn't waver. To him, this wasn't crossing a line. It was how things were done. And I thought to myself, this is how corruption begins. Not with cash, but with the suggestion that the law should look away. I straightened in my chair. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't show anger, but the rhythm of the room changed. The pace slowed. The air tightened. He thought the conversation was between two men. It wasn't. It was between him and the law. Then he made the mistake that told me everything I needed to know. My father would really appreciate keeping this quiet, he added. The words were offered gently, almost politely, like a courtesy, and that's what made them fatal. The courtroom went still, not the uncomfortable stillness of boredom, but the kind that pulls attention into a single point. I saw a few people freeze in their seats. The officer stared straight ahead, unmoving. No one reacted, but everyone heard it. And in that silence, I saw it register on his face, the realization that he'd said too much. His eyes flickered, his mouth tightened. For the first time, his confidence didn't know where to stand. He had crossed a boundary without realizing it existed, and now he understood there was no stepping back over it. I didn't interrupt him. I didn't rush the moment. Because once a person reveals what they expect from power, the court's job is no longer about the charge. It's about the principle they just challenged. I didn't react the way he expected. I didn't lean forward. I didn't harden my voice. I didn't show offense. I simply brought the conversation back to where it always belonged. Sir, I said evenly, your father has no standing in this courtroom. No emphasis, no pause before or after, just a statement of fact. That sentence did what anger never could. For the first time, he lost his rhythm. He started speaking faster, words stepping over one another. He tried to clarify, then correct, then soften what he'd said. His tone shifted, still controlled, but strained now, like a man trying to rebuild a bridge while standing in the river. I didn't mean it like that, he said. I just meant this doesn't have to be complicated. I'm sure we can. He stopped himself mid-sentence. His face flushed, not with shame, but with a sudden shock of resistance. His shoulders tightened. The smooth certainty he'd carried in with him fractured into something reactive and exposed. I watched carefully. In moments like this, there are always two truths: what a person says and what their body admits before they do. His words were scrambling for footing. His posture was collapsing inward. I thought to myself, he's not afraid of the fine. He's afraid that the world just became equal. I explained briefly, without lecture, why what he'd done mattered more than the original violation. Not in legal language, in human terms. When people suggest that matters be kept unofficial, they're not just asking for convenience, they're asking the law to blink. And when the law blinks, trust disappears not all at once, but quietly, case by case, person by person. I could feel the room with me then. No one was enjoying the moment. This wasn't punishment as spectacle. It was understanding settling in. A man in the gallery nodded once, slow. A woman who had been staring at her paperwork finally looked up at him, not with anger, but with a different kind of attention. The kind reserved for someone who has just revealed something true about himself. I didn't invent new charges. I didn't threaten him. I didn't turn the courtroom into a lesson. I did exactly what the law required. I ruled on the original matter, clear, appropriate, proportionate. And then I made one additional decision, quietly, formally. His words were entered into the record, not as punishment, as accountability. He stood there, silent now. The confidence that once filled the space around him had nowhere left to go. He wasn't angry. He wasn't pleading. He was processing the unfamiliar feeling of being treated exactly like everyone else. In all my years on the bench, I've learned this. Consequences don't always teach people what they did wrong, but clarity teaches them where they truly stand. And at that moment, for the first time, he understood it wasn't the court on trial. It was the belief he walked in with. He didn't argue after that. He just stood there, still, like a man who'd been trained his whole life to move forward and suddenly met a door that wouldn't open. His shoulders lowered a fraction, not theatrical, not defeated in a dramatic way, more like his body finally stopped pretending it was in control. The suit was still perfect, the hair still in place, but the confidence that had carried him into my courtroom had drained out of his face. His eyes weren't challenging anymore. They were searching quietly, almost privately, for the old shortcut. It wasn't there. The courtroom stayed silent. No one clapped, no one whispered, but something had changed in the air. It felt cleaner, like someone had opened a window. People weren't celebrating him being corrected. They were relieved that the room still meant what it claimed to mean. I called the next case because that's what a judge does. The calendar moves. The day keeps its pace. But I watched him as he stepped away from the podium. He didn't storm out. He didn't try to regain dignity by acting offended. He simply walked back to his seat, slower than he'd approached, and sat down with his hands flat on his knees like he needed to feel something solid under him. As he left the courtroom a few minutes later, he didn't look at the gallery. He didn't look at the officer. He glanced toward the bench once, not with anger, more like recognition, and then he was gone. I've had people return the next week with an attorney, ready to fight. I've had people come back with a new story, polished and rehearsed. With him, I heard nothing. But weeks later, I learned what mattered. The case didn't vanish. No phone call fixed it. No friendly intervention smoothed the edges. The record stayed exactly as it should. The ruling, the transcript, his words placed where words belong when they cross a line under light, not under a rug. That was the consequence. Real, local, ordinary. Not a scandal, not a headline. Just a young man discovering publicly that a courtroom is one of the last places where the world can still tell you no without bargaining. Months passed, and once in a while I'd think of him, not because I enjoyed the moment, but because it reminded me how fragile fairness is. People don't lose faith in the law only when it's broken. They lose faith when it's bent quietly for the people who expect it. My father used to tell me something when I was young, when I'd come home frustrated about how people behaved. He'd say, "A title is rented, character is owned." He didn't speak like a philosopher. He spoke like a man who carried groceries for a living and understood dignity better than most men in suits. That young man came into my courtroom with a rented certainty. He believed influence could do what truth could not. And when that belief failed him, you could see the moment he didn't know who he was supposed to be next. I don't know what happened in his life afterward. Judges rarely get the full ending. We see a chapter. Sometimes we're lucky enough to see a change. With him, the change was small but unmistakable. He left a courtroom where the law didn't fear him, and for the first time, he had to live with that. And if that sounds harsh, it isn't. It's the most honest gift the system can offer clarity. Because a courtroom isn't a place for special arrangements. It's a place where the truth is supposed to stand up straight, even when people don't. Justice is not being treated better than others, it's being treated the same, even when you're not used to it.